Hello and welcome to the rules walkthrough for Into the Cisterns. This is a bag building cooperative adventure about leading a party of adventurers through a dungeon. To start with setup, we're going to be playing the 3-player game here. I'm going to be playing all 3 players. All 6 characters are controlled by the 3 players, so in this case each player is controlling 2 characters as shown by the 2-player boards in front of each player. Each player also has a bag. This game has 6 different types of virtues, which are positive traits that you use to cause abilities. Each character has 1 of each in their bag. There are also a skills deck. When you set up, you're going to draw the top 3 skills from the skills deck. And you're going to draw 10 encounters face down from the encounter deck. These are going to be the encounters that have to be beaten to win the game. Once you beat all 10 encounters, you'll be able to face the final boss, and when you beat the final boss, you win the game. To start the game, you have 1 of each token in each player's bag, and each player will draw 5 out of those 6 tokens onto their hand board. So we already have 5 tokens on each board ready to go. And then beginning with the first person's turn, each player is going to go through the turn sequence, which has 5 steps. In the first step is the Explore phase. This phase is optional. The player can choose to flip over 1 new encounter and reveal it. If there are no encounters currently out, this is not optional. You always have to have at least 1 encounter out, so on the Explore phase we will flip 1 card over. And we've revealed an encounter. We've found a Desperate Thief. As shown by the tokens at the top, the Desperate Thief has 2 reward tokens, which we're going to place right above it. These function as both the health of the encounter and also the reward for beating the encounter. So this monster has 2 health, essentially. And when we get into the Resolve phase, we'll see how we actually fight the monsters and defeat the other encounters. So after exploring, we're going to go into the Assign phase. This is where we're going to take the chips from our hand and place them out on our board, using them to activate abilities. We can put them anywhere on our board as long as it matches the token, so Inspiration has to be placed on an Inspiration space. In this case, we have just the right tokens to activate 2 of our abilities here. If we wanted to place them in a way that didn't cause an ability to be activated, we could do that, but they would remain on the board until they get used. Now that we've finished assigning, we can resolve our abilities. Any abilities that are completely filled up can get resolved. And we can do them in any order we want, and we can even choose not to resolve them, in which case they'll remain on the board until we choose to resolve that ability. Lawrence has the ability to mentor, which he has the chips for right here. So to activate the ability, he's going to take those chips and discard them back into his bag. And then he's going to take 1 of the 3 skills available and give it to the appropriate character. So he's going to take this ability for Elthode called Instruct. He's going to take it from the skills and give it to the player who controls Elthode, and then replace the skill. Lawrence also has the ability to Engage. When we look on the Desperate Thief, we can see that he is vulnerable to 2 different types of attack. He's vulnerable to Confront and Engage. So we can't use the Exploit ability on him, but we can use Confront or Engage. To use an ability, we're going to discard the tokens on it, and we're going to remove 1 health from the Desperate Thief here. So we're going to take the Courage, which goes into our bag. We now have access to it, and the Thief has 1 less health and is closer to being defeated. So when a virtue is taken, it's always taken into the bag of the character who did the damage. So in this case, player 1 has done the damage, so it's going into player 1's bag to be used by Lawrence or Cadmus in the future. The next step is the Perils phase, where any encounters that are out are going to act. However, they don't act on the turn in which they're revealed. So if they're explored or they come onto the board through reinforcements, they don't act in that turn, which means we don't have a Perils phase this turn. The last phase of the turn is to draw. We're going to draw back up until we have 5 tokens in our hand. And that ends player 1's turn. We'll move on to player 2's turn here. On player 2's turn, even though there's already an encounter out, player 2 could choose to bring a new encounter out. But because the Desperate Thief is still out, we're not going to do that. So player 2 is skipping the Explore phase and moving right into the Assign phase. What player 2 wants to do is attack the Desperate Thief, but he doesn't have the right tokens to activate Elthod's Confront ability, so he's going to have to do something else here. So we're going to assign these tokens. Now any virtue tokens that we don't use are going to get discarded back into the bag. So in this case, player 2 is going to choose to put them out here. Even though this isn't enough to activate the assist ability, as soon as we draw a courage, that'll be ready to go. So we're sort of putting this here to save it. And then we're putting it onto block. Block is a special type of ability that isn't activated in the resolve phase, but instead is activated in any perils phase when it's full. So we're essentially skipping the resolve phase because there are no abilities to resolve, and we're going to go right to the perils phase. Because the thief has been out for at least one turn, the thief is going to attack now, and we roll the monster dice, or the encounter dice, to find out what happens. In this case, we've rolled the omega symbol, which has an hourglass, which means that nothing happens. But for the sake of the demonstration, we're going to roll that again. And this time we've rolled a triangle, which means that the Desperate Thief is going to provide a wound token. This wound token is taken by the current player and always put into the bag of the current player. Wounds are always added into the bag of the current player. If it were a flaw that was instead being added, it would go into the character that owns that flaw. So Elthod is only vulnerable to anger, so anytime anger is gained, no matter what the source, it always goes into the player that controls Elthod's bag. Lawrence has doubt, so any doubt goes into player 1's bag in this case. However, Elthod has used block, which means she can choose to cancel any one peril. So instead of gaining this wound, we're going to discard these tokens here and block the attack so that it doesn't happen. Now Elthod's turn is over and she's going to draw back up to 5. She doesn't have enough to draw up to 5, so she draws as much as she can, which in this case is 4 tokens. Next is going to be player 3's turn. Player 3 is confident that he can take care of the Desperate Thief, so player 3 is going to use his Explore phase and bring out a new enemy. This enemy has 3 health, and one of those health is actually made up of a flaw instead of a temptation, but that works just the same as others. It goes on the board as hit points for the monster. Next, we're going to move into the Assign phase, where we want to try and start taking care of these enemies that are on the board. We're not going to use this inspiration, so we're just going to discard it so that we can draw it again later. And now we're going to resolve these abilities that we've activated. Roderick is going to use this Confront ability on the Desperate Thief. So we take the final token that's above the Desperate Thief, which means that the thief has been defeated and the card is discarded. That thief won't be causing any trouble anymore. We're going to use the Engage, which the Dark Bargainer is also vulnerable to. We can choose any one of these tokens to take. So we could take an Inspiration or an Innovation into player 3's bag. Instead, we're going to take this Temptation just to get it out of the way. We've got to take it eventually. But because it's a Temptation, and Cadmus is the one vulnerable to Temptation, it goes into his bag even though it's player 3's turn. We're going to end player 3's turn by rolling an attack. In this case, we've rolled the Reinforcement result. So we're going to bring a new encounter out from this pile over here. So we're not advancing our progress towards the end of the game, we're simply bringing out another encounter that's going to cause trouble until it's defeated. These new encounters are always placed to the right of the current encounter, and if we run out of space, no reinforcements will come, which prevents it from escalating too much out of control. Note that if we hadn't used Elthod's block in the last turn, it would still be there. We could activate it even though it's not her turn to cancel the current peril. So now player 3 is going to draw back up to 5. And we're going to move back into player 1's turn and continue the game. We are now picking up partway through the game in order to illustrate a couple of the other concepts that can happen in this game, mostly wounds and flaws, as well as the special player board up in the top here. Wounds and flaws are special types of tokens that are mostly used to activate negative abilities, and you can't discard them like you can with virtues. So player 1 has a doubt and a wound on his board. He can leave them on his board, but whenever he goes to draw, he's only going to draw until he has 5 in his hand. So these are reducing the number of tokens he's drawing until he does something with them. He can play them on their particular space, but when this space is filled up, this ability is going to activate whether we want it to or not. When he fills up all 3 of these doubt, he's going to activate this doubt ability and discard all 3 tokens. Wounds can only be removed from your hand by playing them on the health tracks up here. And he has to play them on a health track for one of the characters he controls. So player 1 here is in a sort of bad situation because he can only play them to Lawrence or Cadmus. He's going to play this wound, and either one is going to fill up the health track for that character. When you fill up the health track for a character, that character dies. The game doesn't end when one character dies, but if 2 characters are dead at the same time, the game is immediately over. That's a loss. When a character dies, let's say here Lawrence is dying, you no longer have access to their abilities, so you take these cancel tokens and you cover up their abilities to remind you that you don't have access to any of their abilities anymore. However, even with Lawrence dead, the party continues to gain doubt. That means player 1 is still going to take doubt tokens, but is not going to have anywhere legal to play them, so they're just going to fill up his board until he gets rid of them. But another option the players have to them is to play tokens onto this player board up here. When you play a token onto the player board, it removes it from your bag permanently, so you only want to do it if it's a token that you have more of than you want. But you can use that to activate any one of these 4 abilities. Resurrect and Einhajar are both abilities that help you out when a character has died. Resurrect will bring a character back to life, removing all of these tokens from their board and allowing that character to act again. If you fill up Einhajar, instead, you will get to remove all of the flaws for the character that has died. So Lawrence's doubt is causing trouble for the party with Lawrence dead, so we might use Einhajar to get rid of those doubts. But you can only activate one of these abilities when you fill it up completely. So the one that we're ready to do here is Exile. So Lawrence is going to take this Serenity and place it on Exile, removing it from his bag and filling up the Exile track, which means we can now exile one member of our party, which might be useful if someone is becoming a problem. It looks like Fabian has taken quite a bit of weakness at this point, so we're going to exile Fabian. When we exile him, just like someone dying, we cover up their board, but we also remove all of that character's flaws while keeping any other tokens in the bag. So we have 2 weakness on the board here that are immediately getting removed, and we're going to search the bag for the other weakness and pull them out as well. When we're done, we should have a pile of 10 weakness, because that's all the weakness in the game, and we're going to put a cancel token on that. From now on, anytime weakness is gained, we don't gain anything. So if that's rolled for perils, it's as if no perils happened. We're no longer subject to weakness. Whenever you remove any token from your hand, you can draw back up to replace it immediately. There are other abilities that let you remove tokens from hands or boards, and that has the same effect. When you remove a token, you place it back in the pile. This is an advantage because if any pile runs out completely and you have to gain 1 more from it, then you immediately lose the game. So a pile getting low can be a problem. If you remove tokens and place them back in the pile, you're staving off the end of the game in that way. Now a character that's been exiled can still get redeemed. If we fill up the redemption track, we could bring Fabian back into the party. We would take these tokens off of his board so that he could use his abilities again. But now that Fabian has been kicked out of the party and welcomed back in, he's now no longer subject to weakness. He's become much braver, and weakness is still covered up and still no longer able to be gained. Any other rules questions are covered in the rules, but that's the basic walkthrough of how to play the game. Again, you win the game when you've explored all of the encounters in the Explore deck, and then when you've fought the beggar as described in the rules. Thank you for watching and have a good day.